Let me first ask you, I think what I have felt and what a lot of people seem to feel as far as being in your purpose is like you'll know because you're going to be in a role where what you're doing, most of it, a lot of it, you're passionate about and you're gifted with and it has meaning.
I'll tell my own personal story if that's okay.
Sure. Yep.
I had finished school. I had gotten married. I was living with my new wife, your mom, in my parents' basement. I needed a job. So
I just picked one.
Took the job that opened. I interviewed multiple times for 7 months. Finally, a job was offered to me, and I said, yes, I want to be in ministry. It's in Pittsburgh. I had interned at this church. They wanted me to come on staff. I said yes.
How did you feel about it when you got accepted at elsewhere?
I felt like they're going to pay me for this for a few days. Then you realize how much everything costs. And then I just was like, this doesn't feel right at all. The job description they gave me, they changed within a matter of weeks. The church was in tension. It was going through the middle of a split. Several staff members left. Pretty much every day for a while, I begged the Lord to leave.
All right. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we talk about the purpose behind the plans. My name's Dave.
And my name's Jeff, and I'm the lead pastor at Allison Park Church. This is my son, Dave. Of course, he's the campus pastor at Northside. And I don't know if you've noticed, if you are a regular follower of our podcast, Dave has lost some serious weight.
Thanks.
Give it up. Come on. How much have you lost in the last
30-some.
Man, that's awesome. What are you doing? Just fasting.
Just
fasting for 40 days.
Yeah, starving myself. Something like that. Just a diet. So
awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So
this is not yet our podcast on aliens, but it is soon to come, we hope, right?
I'm ready. As soon as we could let's make a left turn right now. I'll just start throwing stuff at you. Yeah. So today I'm actually really excited for our podcast because this is a podcast topic that I've had a lot of conversations with over the years, especially with younger leaders. I think it really applies to everybody, but especially I think it's something that when people are first getting started with their careers or their ministry or their business or whatever it might be, is very present on your mind. Also maybe around the middle of your life as well, right? So basically here's the idea of the discussion today. I want to talk about what does it feel like when you know your calling? What does it feel like to be in your purpose?
Yes.
I want to try to I don't want to talk about how to find your purpose. The reason we do this podcast is to talk about the plan behind or the reasons behind the why.
So this is like, how do you know that you found it? Not how to find it, but what happens when you found it.
And what is it like experientially? And what would be, basically, I think in my experience, a lot of younger leaders that I've talked to have this sort of questioning, wondering, like, I hope I'm in it. I hope I'm doing the right stuff. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm happy. I don't know if I have a peace about this. I'm not sure.
So confirming signs. What are the marks that you're on the right track?
Yeah. And how would you know? How do you step into it? And basically, I want to help to outline this guide map. So that's a pretty broad and vague question, but it's one that I think is really weighing on a lot of people. So why don't you just start? What are your initial thoughts as I bring this up?
Yeah. So I think in our culture today, there are a couple of nagging questions that our culture deals with all the time. One is, who am I? Identity. Who am I really? And how do I know that I'm being true to who I really am? That's one of the big questions. And the second is, what am I supposed to do? And how do I know that I have discovered my purpose? And am I doing the right thing? And if I am doing the right thing, why does it sometimes feel so mundane? And when do I know when I'm supposed to change doing the thing that I'm doing so that I can do something else? Because what do they say? I think your generation in their lifetime will change careers 7 times.
Right.
So there's one of the things, if you have options, sometimes there is the paralysis of decision that comes because you have 19 different things you can do and you don't want to make a mistake. Maybe in previous generations, there were 2 choices. I can go this or I can go that. There's not a lot of options, so I'm going to pick one of the 2. So there was no paralysis that came with that because purpose questions were limited because opportunities were limited. Well, now Your generation has grown up in an era where there's so many opportunities, so many options, so many different ways to spend your life that you don't want to miss it. You don't want to make a mistake. You want to end up doing with your life what you're supposed to do. So those are some of the things I think that we're going to search through during this conversation.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, for my generation and younger, I don't think it so much feels like there are too many options. Therefore, that's the problem, like making the right decision. I think a lot of there have been a lot of even books and studies done on this recently, but about working for purpose. Daniel Pink wrote a book. I can't recall which one. It's going to come to me in a second. But he talks about this idea of how working for a profit isn't satisfying. You want to have meaning in your work, and I think that especially as a Christian who believes that we're called by God to a destiny that we've had before we were born, that we're made for a specific purpose. I think there's a lot of us that feel like I don't want to, make a mistake that maybe I know people in an older generation have made, where they've just worked a job they hated for 40 years and got burned by the company and felt like they wasted their time. And, I'd rather get paid less and be in an environment that I want to be, or where I feel like there's meaning, or especially where I feel like I'm in my calling.
Right.
And so it's kind of a pressing question. In fact, I think there have been studies that have shown that millennials and Gen Z will actually take big pay cuts to work in a place that feels like it's attached to meaning, as opposed to just making the most money.
Yeah, and to get it out of just those two generations, a lot of people who are my age and older are also thinking about, what will I do with the rest of my life? I've worked a career for 40 years. I'm now healthy. I'm ready to retire. Not that I'm ready to retire, but I'm saying people older than me. So now if I'm 65 and retiring, and I think I'm going to be healthy till I'm 85, I have 20 years. So what can I do of significance with the rest of my life? Which I think is a question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah,
as well.
actually, chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, either you have experienced that, or more likely you're probably a little bit there right now.
Sure.
It's almost a universal sort of a nagging thing in the back of your mind, unless you're so happy. I'm paid enough and I'm in a place that I love and I'm in a power spot. But I mean, what is that got to be? Less than 10% of people, that are in the world, let alone listening to this podcast. So I think it's probably a struggle that feels real and of a lot of significance. I would say, if I was listening to this right now, I would be thinking, this whole thing would be so worth it 10 times over if at the end of this podcast, I had a better idea of how I would know either whether I'm in my calling now, which maybe I'm not, maybe I am, or how to step into that. That would be.
Yeah. And then due to the pandemic, I don't know if you saw this stat, George Barna's organization said that during COVID-19 pandemic, 29% of pastors thought about resigning last year.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. If we probably are talking to pastors and leaders in church in our podcast, you may have had a soul searching moment because of the tension and pressure you endured. Maybe you're asking that question for a different reason, but it's still the question you have.
Yeah. So let me just even describe my own experience for a second, just to be a little vulnerable here, because I think that this is one that it feels like it's been a common thing throughout the pandemic. So I transitioned from my role as youth pastor to be a campus pastor in May of 2020. I was supposed to start in March of 2020.
That was delayed because of the pandemic.
Because the pandemic, pushed that back a little bit. And so that sent everything into a funk. And, I would say objectively, things at Northside, my campus, are great. I mean, I have an amazing team that I thank God for, because they're awesome. And our campus feels great. People that are attending are amazing. But for whatever reason, our community has been slower to come out of some of the cautiousness than other places around Pittsburgh. And so we haven't really seen our numbers go back to what I would consider normal for our campus or our region. And for me, that's made me, like, at times when I'm less healthy or when I'm not conscious of what my thoughts are, be like, am I the right person for this? Like, would there have been somebody else who'd be doing a better job? Like, am I biting off more than I can chew?
Am I supposed to be here in the first place?
Yeah. Am I not working hard enough?
Did I miss something else? Is there something else out there for me?
And I think what ends up happening with a lot of people, this wasn't my particular experience, when there's all these competing emotions, I want to follow God's calling. I don't know that I'm in the right spot, because I think I would feel more happy and successful and like just at least a piece about this, but I'm so uncomfortable and frustrated and doubting myself. And so I have no idea whether again, I feel I've kind of processed through this and had conversations with you about things like this.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I've arrived at a place of now I even when it feels bad, not the campus, but even when I feel like I'm doubting or I'm frustrated, I still know pretty certainly this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm called to be.
This is
here.
actually part of what makes this podcast work, actually, Dave, is that your willingness to be vulnerable and share your own struggle. Because I think when you're transparent, it relates to where people are. And by the way, I just want to say, Dave has not lost weight because he's depressed. He actually is strategically.
I'll lose it any way I can, though, right? Whatever you got to do.
But you are bringing up the question that a lot of people struggle through. And now I'll say, I'm actually in the opposite spot. I'm in the 10%. I know I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. I feel I'm completely in my power spot. It's not that I'm without stress in the role, because sometimes I'm confused and don't know what to do. But I absolutely know who I am, that I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I kind of know where I'm going. And there is such a beauty to that kind of clarity. And so
we're all jealous of you.
I long for that for everybody listening to this.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's really not about being successful. It's about being centered. And that may be part of this conversation is you got to be centered on something. And I don't want to do the big reveal too soon, but that's what I would say is there's something about being centered on some things that helps you get clarity on this.
I want to hear more about that in a second, but let me first ask you, I think what I have felt and what a lot of people seem to feel as far as being in your purpose is like, you'll know because you're going to be in a role where what you're doing, most of it, a lot of it, you're passionate about and you're gifted with, and it has meaning. And it's like if those things aren't there, if you're not passionate about it, or maybe it has meaning but not necessarily for you, or you don't feel like you're gifted in it, it's like, okay, this maybe is a very short-term thing, or maybe just the wrong thing. I've actually heard young leaders say, maybe I'm sinning by being in this position. Because it's not what you would term as a power spot, right? Of that perfect synergy of where the 10% like you are. I'm not even sure if that is 10%. It's probably less than that, totally honestly. But so do you feel like that has to be like that alignment in order to be in your calling or purpose, like where you are right now?
So, okay, now we're talking about where we begin. Do we begin with how I feel about it? Or is there some other beginning for this conversation? Because it may be that the reason why there's so much searching is that you're beginning with the wrong question. And that is, when will I know that I feel that I'm in the right place? So it may be that the emotional component of this is part of what makes it difficult for people to discern.
Well, let's pull it back for a second, because I think you narrowed that more than I think would be fair for how people feel.
Yeah.
Because it's not when will I feel, it's when will I know.
When will I know?
Now, does my generation and a lot of people tend to think partially through our emotions, and the way that we feel about it helps us to know? Yeah, but I think it's less when will I feel, more like when will I know, or how will I know?
Yeah. Okay, so how do you want to proceed? I will follow you because you're the one searching this out, and I want to respond in order to your questions.
Yeah. So let's start with this. Let's start with this question. How would you define what it means to be in purpose? Like, what is purpose?
Yeah. Okay. So let's forget about where we are and what we feel at the moment, and let's look at the grand scheme of things.
Right.
There is a designer in heaven, a creator of the world, and he has an agenda for what's happening on planet Earth. He's like a chess master in the sky, okay? I know that's almost irreverent, but let's just think God's moving the pieces around on the chessboard to accomplish his purpose. When he looks at you and he sees how he designed you and he sees where you are and what the needs are around you, he will give an assignment to your life that isn't really related to whether or not it's going to fulfill you. He's going to give an assignment to your life based upon whether or not it accomplishes what he needs to be done.
Wait, so play that out more.
Okay, so God might say, right now, there's a crisis. Let's say, look, there's a fire burning and it's getting ready to consume this house. And you have a fire hose in your hand. I want you to run to the fire and put that flame out. God isn't asking you at that moment, Would it fulfill you to take that hose and put that fire out? He's just saying, get it done. Like, don't you realize there's a crisis? Like, I don't care what you feel at the moment. This field is on fire. This family's going to burn. You have the water in your hand. Run. Like, get over there right now. Let's not stop and pause to ask how it makes us feel. Let's just go get that job done. So God, who's created you, has an assignment. And there are some things happening in the world today that make our assignment different. I'll throw a Old Testament Jewish scriptures, to say it properly based on our last podcast, moment in the book of Jeremiah where the city of Jerusalem is going to be under siege, and they're going to be carrying away the people in captivity. And Jeremiah prophesies to a friend of his, I think his name was Baruch, and he says to him, do not seek great things for yourself. This is not the time for that. Your country is in a crisis, and this is not a time for you to consider, what will this mean for me? Because you have a role to play, and this is not a season where it's going to feel all that fulfilling. I just want you to fulfill my purpose, okay? So God's purpose for you and your sense of purpose sometimes can be different because God is just trying to meet need. Think of it almost like we're a robot for a minute now. He has put something in your hand and you have the right tool, and he's going to move you over, and he's going to cause you to open the right door so that some things can happen on earth. And that is really just about the design of the designer and the problems in your community and where you live and what's going on in the world and how God's getting ready to position you for his purpose. So that really has nothing to do with self-fulfillment and actualization. It's really all about how God wants to operate on earth and what he chooses to do with you.
So like you're almost describing it though in a way that it makes it sound like we're just mindless drones, pawns on a chessboard that he moves where he wants just for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Is that how you see it?
Mindless drones, no. Chess pieces, yes.
Okay.
Right? So, of course you are. Of course he's made you. So, Ephesians 2:10, we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he's prepared in advance for us to do. God looked at your life. He designed you with the right personality, the right gifts, so that he could position you to do the work that needed to be done at the time it needed to be done. And so when you end up stepping into that assignment that God has for your life, and you start to actually fulfill what God has called you to do, the byproduct of that is exhilaration. You feel like, this is what I was born for. I'm doing exactly what I was supposed to do. This is amazing. That doesn't mean it's perfect or without pain, but it means that when you do get moved by the chess master into the position he designed you for, to do the thing he designed you to do, you eventually get great fulfillment and satisfaction.
Define eventually.
Okay. So eventually means at some point in the long, as you are, so the big thing about finding purpose is accepting responsibility for a problem. It isn't about finding your spiritual center of peace. It's about saying, I will own that.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Let me ask it in a different way. Spiritual center of peace is very karma.
Didn't sound like I chose that on purpose.
Yeah, but that's not how a lot of Christian young leaders would say it. What about if you don't feel like your work is bringing you life?
Yeah. Or
you don't feel like your work, you don't feel like you're making as big of an impact as you could be somewhere else, or
so can I?
It's bad for your mental health.
Can I personalize now? I'll tell my own personal story if that's okay.
Sure. Yep.
All right. So when I came on staff here at Allison Park Church, I came on staff in 1988. I was the pastoral assistant. I was the youngest and the newest of 5 staff members. I got all the stuff that no one else wanted to do. I was there to get experience. I was new. I was happy to have a ministry job. None of my job description necessarily was all that motivating for me. I just wanted to be in the ministry, and this was the open door for me. I took it. I started to work at it.
Wait. So can you elaborate again? I'm sorry to keep pausing you. So you jumped on staff at a church. What were you doing?
I had finished school. I had gotten married. I was living with my new wife, your mom, in my parents' basement. I needed a job. So
So
I
you just picked one.
took the job that opened. I interviewed multiple times for 7 months. Finally, a job was offered to me, and I said, yes, I want to be in ministry. It's in Pittsburgh. I had interned at this church. They wanted me to come on staff. I said, yes.
How did you feel about it when you got accepted at Allison Park?
I felt like they're going to pay me for this for a few days. Then you realize how much everything costs. And then I just was like, this doesn't feel right at all. The job description they gave me, they changed within a matter of weeks. The church was in tension. There was going through the middle of a split. Several staff members left. Pretty much every day for a while, I begged the Lord to leave. God, I felt a call to be involved with church planting at some point in my life. And I thought I was going to leave Allison Park Church and go plant a church somewhere. And every time I would say, God, why can't you let me leave here or go do something else? This is unpleasant. I felt him say, nothing.
Okay, so I'm sorry to keep slowing you down, but this feels like I want to extrapolate what you're saying, because I think a lot of us that are currently in that position feel like this. You graduated college, you get a job offer. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do when you graduated college?
Well, I thought I was going to plant a church.
Okay, so was this veering off course to even take this
job?
Yes,
a little bit, because, so here's what happened. Circumstances put me in a position where I said, God, I'll do whatever you want. So I was going to either plant a church or pastor a small church. I candidated at a church in Newcastle, which is an hour north of Pittsburgh. They told me they liked me. I candidated on a Sunday, preached Sunday morning, Sunday night. They voted on me on Tuesday, and they voted me down. Rejected. I had been searching position after position, church after church. Every door was closed. The night they voted me down, Melody and I got on our knees beside our bed. We said, Lord, whatever you want to do with us, we'll go wherever you want us to go. The next day, Allison Park called. Would you come and interview to be the pastoral assistant? I said, well, yes. I thought I was going to be the pastor of a church. I ended up going on staff at a church. Thought I was going to plant a church. I ended up now coming to Allison Park Church. I accepted that as the will of God because circumstantially it appeared that was an answer to my prayer. I'll do whatever you want me to do.
And at what point of you being on, you were kind of, if I remember this correctly, probably in this 3-year period of being at Allison Park that just sucked.
Well, it was so tough that my pastor was under great criticism. I felt God had sent me here to support him. It was tense. It was unpleasant. It was difficult. It was hard to stay out of the fray of it all. And God was doing something in me during that time. He was building my character. I was learning to die to myself. I was learning to serve people because it pleased God, not because it felt good. I was faithful, and I was faithful to my boss to serve him. I was faithful to the church, not because it was anything pleasing to my flesh. And actually, God was putting me through a crucible. It was like a testing time. It was a purifying time in my life. And none of it felt good, but all of it was critical to my future. And so for 3 years, I was begging God to leave because I didn't feel fulfilled. But I knew that I was in the place he had assigned me to be, because on the great chessboard, God was preparing to promote me to be the lead pastor at a young age at a church of 700 people. The 3 years of bearing the weight of suffering through a difficult time set me up for the time of promotion that God had in my future. But if I had pulled out and said, I want to go someplace that's going to honor me more, it's going to treat me better, that's going to allow me to preach more, that I get to do the things I want to do, I would have missed the opportunity that God was preparing for me, because he wanted me to stay in a place and serve without a lot of positive fulfillment feedback, because it was a proving thing from my life and my character. When God's putting you through the crucible and testing, it doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. When you're going through a time where it's like serve out of discipline, serve out of a desire to please God, serve not because you're being recognized or because you're getting opportunities, those moments actually form you. If you're on a perpetual search for fulfillment, you may miss the formation moments of what it is to be made into a person that God can trust with more responsibility. And if you're skipping around looking for the fleeting feeling of work fulfillment, you might miss the gutted out moments that you persevere and endure and learn what it is to have Christ-like character in the midst of a difficult circumstance.
Yeah. Okay. So, but you were saying that in the midst of those 3 years, which honestly, I don't know of almost anybody in my generation who has stuck it out that long. I mean, that's a very long time. I don't know if it was different when you were at that age or whatever, but I think after a year of that, most people I know would have left, including probably me, you know. So you're saying you're like, God, I want to go somewhere else, and you didn't. Like, why? Why did you stay?
I didn't feel released. So when I would pray about it, God, can I go somewhere else? I felt like him saying no. So here's another thing. You don't get to pick what your assignment is from God if you're truly going to follow his leading. Now, a lot of people make it up as they go along and just ask God to come and bless it after. But if you really want to be where God wants you to be, you have to ask him. And if he tells you no, don't leave. Look, and let me just say this to you. If you're listening to this, you never leave the place where you are until God's called you someplace else.
Oh, you got to say that again.
If it's painful right now and you're escaping just because you don't like the difficulty that it brings to your life, you don't get the freedom. If you're going to really follow Jesus, you don't get the freedom to just depart until God calls you to something else. So many people have made mistakes with their life direction because they pulled the escape hatch on something God was not releasing them from. And I'll tell you too, one of the things that we did to get through this, because we were dealing with relational tension, is we read a book by Gene Edwards called The Tale of Three Kings.
So good.
I read that book 7 times in 3 years.
Yeah.
Because it sustained me and it gave me the perspective to stick it out in those difficult moments. So if you're in a tough place where you're not fulfilled and you feel like you're being tested and there's a fire of trial you're enduring, don't pull the escape hatch. Stick it out, endure, persevere. There is so much you learn there. And listen, God is more concerned with you being the right person for your future than he is just concerned about getting you into the right place. If he positions you to another place, but you haven't been properly prepared, you won't be ready for the things that he's called you to. Part of the journey of preparation is to be in the difficult spots and that you persevere your way through so that you can be ready for your next opportunity.
Yeah. You know, I was just having a conversation with someone, and this verse kind of got dropped in my heart. In fact, actually, earlier this year, when we were praying for a word for our staff, this was actually one that I shared with you, and I think we
I
talked
preached
about
it on Sacred Assembly.
I think you did. Yeah. It's 1 Peter 1, 6, and 7. And I think this is so interesting to me because it goes against the grain of, I think, the modern way of finding purpose or meaning, or even thinking, you know, God made me like this for this reason, so therefore I can glean where I should be. Well, anyway, here's what it says. I'll just read it, then I can elaborate. 1 Peter 1, 6, and 7. So truly be glad. There's wonderful joy ahead, which is a good start to the verse.
Yep.
Even though you must endure many trials for a little while, these trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. And to me, what I was just, when I was reading it about this and praying about it and discussing it, it just kind of hit me. Sometimes God, his purpose is for me to be doing something that is terrible, or to almost where I feel like I'm being wrung out like a cloth, you know, that you're taking water out of, or being put through a fire so that the impurities or the immaturity or whatever it might be gets burned off of me. That actually is a part of purpose.
Sure.
Right? I mean, so we have this, I think there's a myth that everybody has this one long-term kind of a calling or assignment to a country or a city or to a ministry or a church, or as this kind of a director or this kind of a pastor. And until we get there, we're almost going to be spinning our wheels because we're not in that zone. But a lot of what it actually means to be called or to be walking in calling is to have God put you through trials, right?
Well, you're first of all called to a person. You're called to Christ. You're called to his, so he is a person with a purpose for you. And basically you look to him and you say, what now, Jesus? What now, Jesus? What do you want me to do now? How do you want me to respond? And so ultimately you're really just following his leading through life, right? Even Jesus said, listen, this is really important. John 5:19, Jesus said, I don't do anything on my own. I only do what the Father tells me to do. And so when I see the Father telling me something, I do that. and I don't get to make up the agenda for my life. Jesus lived a life of greater purpose than anybody, but he let his life be led by his Father. Look, if you want to have purpose, you have to be called first of all to Christ, to his character, to his nature, his leading. And then you're also, in general principles, God's put gifts in you. So the Paul discovered, I'm an apostle. And then he said, okay, I think I'm actually called to reach Gentiles. And I feel like I'm supposed to be a missionary and travel to Asia and plant churches. And I'm supposed to have a side business that I make tents so that I can leave behind an economic engine in every city. He discovered that over time, but that still did not mean that when Paul went and apostled in Asia planting churches, that everything was pleasant. He was stoned and left for dead. He was beaten with rods. Every place he went, he encountered pain and trial. So being in your power spot doesn't mean it's pain-free. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean every moment feels fulfilling. I mean, when Paul was in the jail in Philippi after he'd just been flogged and he was in the dungeon in the middle of the night, I'm certain he wasn't like saying to Silas, boy, isn't this is such a buzz following Jesus, right? Like, I mean,
this is helping my psychological well-being. Yeah.
He basically had to worship his way through that to get to the other side. So just because you're in your power spot doesn't mean everything's pleasant.
Well, let's actually back up. Would you say that when Paul was in jail, he was in his power spot?
Sure.
Really? Because it feels like he wouldn't have been. I mean, he was obviously in the will of God, but I think, isn't it possible to be in your calling and in your purpose without being in your quote unquote power spot?
So, okay, how can you be in the will of God and not in your power spot?
Well, if your power spot, if we're defining it as where you're gifted and competent and passionate, and they all, and it has meaning and an impact, and right, they all intersect.
So let me just ask you this question. Let's say Paul was in Philippi for 9 months, and in that time he preached 20 sermons. We don't have a record of any of those sermons. That may have been his power spot. He's teaching the word. He's in his power spot.
Sure.
What we do have a record of was when he was in the jail and he worshiped and there was an earthquake and the jailer got saved and his wife got saved. We still talk about that today.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe your power spot has nothing to do with how you execute your weekly tasks.
Okay.
Maybe it has a whole lot more to do with obedience.
Let me ask this.
In the midst of it all.
Let me ask this. How much should we expect to be fulfilled? Like, you're saying it has less to do with, the daily tasks, more to do with obedience. If we're in obedience, should we expect to be fulfilled?
Well, let me ask this question. What in the world does fulfilled mean to you? Like, what does that mean?
Personally, how would I define it?
Like, yeah, how do you, like, I'm happy. I'm filled with joy. I wake up every morning without self-doubt.
Yeah.
Like, because that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
I feel 100% in my power spot. I know where I'm going with my life. Do I have self-doubt? Yes. Are there days I feel like quitting? Absolutely. Does criticism sting? Yes. Do sometimes I feel like I'm not capable to do the job I'm called to do? Sure. Does it mean I'm not in my power spot? I have to weigh the overriding understanding of myself. And that has to take on more weight than my momentary doubts and joys and discouragements. I can't let those little discouragements and doubts shake my entire view of myself every time they arise, or they'll pull me off track. To feel doubt and discouragement is just normal. It doesn't mean you're not where you're supposed to be, and it doesn't mean you're not in your power spot. It just means that some parts of life make us question, and you can't let that rock your whole world.
I think that this conversation is probably really difficult for people who are idealists, which in certain regards, I mean, so I'm generally a pragmatist, you know what I mean? Like, I would actually say I'm optimistic more than pessimistic, but I'm pretty realism about most things. But I think especially whenever I was first getting into ministry, I had this idealistic view of finding the exact right position, and and honestly, it for a while made me feel paralyzed. I had way more options than what you're talking about. I mean, we had conversations in the several months. I think I lived at home for 2 months after I graduated in 2013. And you kept being like, just pick something, Dave. And I was like, no, I'm not just gonna pick something. It has to be the right thing. I think what's so hard about all of this, but it might just be like the truth we need, is this idea of finding that spot that God has designed for us. That's like what this, eventually, oh, we're just going to be in the flow, and God's going to pull us into that gravitation of where we're meant to be. Versus you're like, no, you're kind of like a chess piece, and He's like, go here, don't leave until I tell you to leave. That is so opposite. But I think I can't think of where it is in Acts. Wasn't there a part whenever Paul wanted to leave a place, but God never actually gave him permission, and so he was there?
When he got to Philippi, he wanted to go to different places, and God kept shutting the door, and he ended up in Philippi because the Macedonian man said, come over here and help us. But let me give you a different example. Think of it like this, and maybe this is a little bit of a generational thing. So I'm at the tail end of boomer, and you're what, millennial, right, Dave?
Yep,
okay.
Millennial.
So the level of hardship that a generation goes through sometimes shapes it. So during the pandemic, I watched the movie Midway.
Oh, yeah, it's a good movie.
So if you're the fighter pilot that's dive bombing to take out the guns on the enemy ship that's trying to bomb out you don't think as you get into that plane, I wonder if this is my purpose, right? You don't think, does this fulfill me to fly this plane? The way you judge your purpose or not is if you win the war, or give your life in the cause of it. So the purpose of God is really about the war you're in. It isn't about how you feel. So if you don't feel all that fulfilled flying that plane, but you just saved 1,000 lives on that ship, you have fulfilled your purpose. But if you feel fulfilled but are failing to fly that plane, and people are dying because you're not doing your job, you might feel fulfilled because you're over there doing something else. But what's needed of you is for you to be in position to do what God's designed you to do. And God is way more concerned with a broken world that's lost than He is about your emotional state at the moment.
Yeah.
And I know that's kind of hard to say, but look, when you are being used in the hand of God to do something great for the kingdom, and you can see the results of your life, I think maybe you should judge yourself more on the cause you're a part of, than the feelings you have at any given moment. So when I said, yes, Lord, I'll go to Allison Park and be the pastoral assistant, I was just signing up for the military. I was just saying, okay, I will go. I'll submit to my pastor. I will learn what it is to fight. I'll learn what it is to be part of a pastoral staff. I'll prepare myself. I'll be faithful. I'll pray. I'll show up. I'll be on time. I'll have a good attitude. I'll care for the people that are uncared for. And I just did what I was called to do. And then God opened doors for me and gave me influence and opportunity. But its root cause didn't start with me seeking to be emotionally fulfilled. It just started with me fulfilling the cause I was called for. And so you got to live for a cause. Don't live for a feeling.
So I just want to clarify, because I think when you keep saying it like that, you stop speaking the language of my generation and younger.
Yeah, sorry.
Because I think for so much of it is hard to distinguish what's a feeling and what's a calling and what's a purpose. And a whole other thing we could do would be, what does it actually sound like when God speaks versus when it's wisdom versus when it's our desires, and all that can get mixed and jumbled. Yeah, but I think a lot of this, the idea of assignment. I mean, so I watched that movie as well, Midway, and I remember actually having this epiphany. There's a scene when they just get back from taking out a battleship, and there's one more that another crew couldn't take care of, and they're like, "Listen, you guys have to go back out the second time in one day and risk dying." And there's that younger character that's like, I can't do it. And then they have this conversation. He's like, look, you're going to regret this for the rest of your life. And he's like, all right, fine. And I just was thinking, like, obviously I would never want to go through that voluntarily, but how much more does this kind of a generation who's had to make these choices, they just can push through anything. Because I guess there is no options and you have to. So I totally get why there's that different mentality. I think this has been helpful and good. I guess, like, it really has. I'm just, what I feel like is there's a lot of ideas that I want to take through the rest of the translation interface here, so that they really resonate with what people are thinking and feeling about their own calling or purpose. So we've talked a lot about God will send you. God has a place for you. He'll tell you stay or go. And if you haven't heard go, don't go, and you're here to serve. I think there's a couple of things. One thing that comes to mind is I think a lot of people will be like, well, that's how you get burned out, is by doing something that you don't feel filled in, that you don't have purpose. The other thing is, well, that's how churches use you. You're just being asked to do a bunch of stuff you don't want to do, and you're not appreciated, and you should just go somewhere else because that's not really. So I think, some people might be hearing this, like, so just never leave, just be in a toxic place for you. You were there 3 years. Should I be there 30 years? Should I hate my life? Is that what it means to follow Jesus, Jeff? Like, can you expand on this idea? Like, isn't it possible that just, just viewing yourself in the military will leave you feeling discouraged and burned out
Mhm.
and out early? Or isn't it possible that if you're not careful, the church might just be using you?
Yeah. Okay, so let's look. Here's how I look at it like this: look past your boss, look past your church, look past your employer, look into the eyes of God. So say, God, I am not here to serve this man or woman. I'm not here to serve this church. I'm here to serve you. What's your assignment? I I can do that anywhere, but I don't want to get off assignment. So I want to go where you want me to go. So let's think about a parable, the parable of the talents or the minas. Two different times it's told, one in Matthew, one in Luke, where the money lender, the boss said, here's 5 talents, here's 2 talents, here's 1 talent. And they took it and they took responsibility over it and they worked it. And they came back, the one with 5 with 10, the one with 2 with 4. And the one with 1 buried it because he didn't know what might happen. He didn't know how his boss was going to respond. He was worried about how it was going to be perceived. Okay. In the parable of the minas in the book of Luke, the response of the boss is to say, now you were faithful with what I gave you. Take charge of 10 cities. So if you want to advance with God, the first thing you got to do is show responsibility. You got to say, I'll take ownership for this problem, God. I'll stay in this cockpit. I'll stay on this wall. I'll defend my spot. If they fire at me, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to keep steady. I'm going to do what you've called me to do. And I'm going to be fruitful here. And then what God does is he looks and he says, I have found somebody that will be a good steward of what I've given them. I'm going to give them more. You can't get more from God without being responsible. And God won't look and say, wow, look how fulfilled you look. Let me give you more. He's going to look and say, look at how responsible you've been. Look at what a good steward you've been. Look at how fruitful in that difficult space. So my story is I was there for 3 years. And then when my pastor went to California, I became the pastor of the church. If I hadn't stuck it out for those 3 years, I would have never made it into the opportunity I am in now.
Yeah.
So you're being a good steward of the moment you're in the place where you are, and being fruitful with it with a good attitude gets the attention of heaven.
Mm.
You should not be trying to please yourself, nor to please the people around you. Your primary job is to please God. He's the great chess master. If you do that, God will take care of the rest. He'll make sure you are in the right place doing the right thing. If you are perpetually seeking that elusive feeling of fulfillment in your career, you are probably not going to ever get to the place where you'll be willing to shoulder the kind of responsibility necessary for you to become promotable. And that means you gotta own it. You gotta say, this is mine. I'll take care of this. God, you can count on me. And I know it's just counter to maybe what the generation feels. But one of the best things that ever happened in my life that has now positioned me to feel like I'm in my power spot today is that I took on a lot of responsibility really early in my life. When I was in my mid-20s, I was bearing more responsibility than a lot of people do when they're 40.
Right.
And the responsibility could have crushed me, but it actually developed me.
Mm-hmm.
Don't run from responsibility, because responsibility is actually the thing that will build you into the next phase. Now, I don't know if I just answered the questions right for you.
No, I think you are. Okay, so here's where I'm sort of seeing all of this. I think I can specifically talk to my generation and those that are younger than me, because I have had a lot of these conversations, not so much for the ones above me. But what I can say is that this is a particular area where I think that my generation specifically will be called to die to our own selves more than because it feels really easy to spiritualize my desires. I don't feel like this is giving me life, or I don't feel like I'm making it as much of an impact, or I'm not even sure if I want to be here or in this city. In fact, I've actually heard some pastors that I really deeply respect say, you know what, as long as you just do what you're doing for the glory of God, you can go anywhere and be anywhere. Go be fulfilled. But that's really not a biblical perspective, honestly.
Well, there's room for that. I mean, I think you can serve Jesus and go to heaven and do the things that are within the zone of your. But I just think he's way more personal and specific than that. I don't think God has a general plan for your life. I think he has a very precise one.
Well,
And
so if he does a precise one, it can't be both and, right?
Well, he has a precise one that involves you dying to yourself.
And probably doing some so the idea, the laissez-faire, go and just do it for the glory of God wherever, whatever you want, is probably not. That's a general plan.
Yeah. So
which just seems like it's
So
branching
you
off
can
from-
pick the general plan, but God, if you're going to ultimately follow him, has a very precise one. So he'll still, like, as the grand chess master, he will use what you offer to him. He's not going to say, well, you haven't picked the precise plan I had for you, so I'm going to not use you anymore. No, he'll use you wherever you show up, because you're still going to try to do good in the world, and he's going to put you in place somewhere. But if you start to say, I want to follow you step by step, I want exactly what you've called me to do. I want to be in the right place at the right time, doing what you've prepared for. Because listen, there have been some things in my life that I have stepped into that are truly miraculous breakthroughs that have changed whole cities that would never have happened had I just followed the general will.
Okay.
So, but the precise plan had powerful breakthroughs, but it also involved me dying to myself. Like, there is no plan for your life that does not involve you dying to yourself.
Okay, but yeah, so
like, let's just get over that from the very beginning.
Yeah,
if you think that you are going to follow Christ in ministry without having to die to yourself, you are on the wrong career path. There's just no process of following Jesus that does not involve dying to yourself and living for him. And typically early in your ministry life, he will design things that will force you to have to do that.
Right.
He's not like, well, once you've been fulfilled for a while in your ministry, then we'll get to death to self later. He starts there.
Yeah.
Okay. And actually, there is no fulfillment in ministry until you have died to yourself.
Right.
So let's get that out of the way. Let's start there. Okay, so I'm in a hard place. Let me just die to myself now so that we can get on with the rest of it.
Well, and it seems like from some of the leaders that I look up to, you're called to die to yourself early because you have to die to yourself more
over and over in bigger ways later
that you could have never handled if you wouldn't have been able to do the smaller things in the beginning.
You know, let me just say this. I think some people in my generation and yours look at ministry as a career choice, and they're looking for a career path. There's a difference between having ministry as a career and having ministry as a calling. A calling is about someone who's speaking and saying, over here, hey, I've designed you for this. Come, over here. If you're not listening to what he's calling, then you're actually just choosing a ministry career.
Okay.
And if you want a ministry career and you're going to choose it that way, then take your best opportunity. The one that's going to pay you the most, the one that's going to honor you the most. If you want a calling, what they pay you and how they honor you doesn't matter.
Hold on a second. What you just said was so weird for you to say. So if somebody, what I heard initially before you just said that was, if you want a ministry career, I would have finished that sentence, ministry's probably not for you, right? Well, because you shouldn't be just taking the highest paid positions.
That's the general path.
Okay.
Right? So I'm going to fulfill the general will of God, and I'm going to choose ministry as a career, and I'm going to look for the best opportunities I can have that will fulfill me the most. That is doesn't have anything specific for me, so I'm going to search it out and find what fits for me. But if you're going to say God is precise, he has a precise plan, he's calling me over here, often God calls you to take the position that doesn't look the best and that doesn't pay the most, and that may be a harder road. And so you have to say, what is God calling me to do? Because the career path and the calling is often at odds with each other.
Okay, so you're still dodging my question. I have to ask this a little bit.
I'm not going to tell anybody to get out of ministry.
No, I know you're not. But I guess what I'm asking.
I think the motive in ministry sometimes, if your motive is career, I think your motives are off.
There we go. That's what I was looking for.
It is. Will God stop using you? No, he's going to use you. I believe he'll always use you. But you're going to miss out on the best parts of what it is to be in partnership with God. Because God, look, your ministry is never designed to be something you do for God. It's actually something you do with him.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not following the precise path, you'll end up doing it for him. But if you follow him precisely, you'll do it in partnership with him. And then you get to see him do amazing things.
Yeah.
And that makes you say, I know where I'm supposed to be. I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. So partnership with God is the way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't say enough about my life at the beginning of my journey was really difficult in ministry. But where I am now, I wouldn't trade for the world.
Yeah. I think that when we talk about this idea of the general plan versus the specific plan that God has, right? Like both of those are happening at the same time. God, at least according to our theology, we don't believe that God chooses your toothpaste and the color of your toothbrush and every little small detail that you do.
Right.
Because we believe that God has given people free will. That's a whole other thing that we can get into another point. But that there is still a specific enough plan through his foreknowledge, right? So I think when I'm hearing this, it's just almost like underlying all of this is sort of this man-centered future plan or God-centered. Like if it's I want to choose from my contentedness or fulfillment or power spot or creative juices being used or whatever it might be, or living by the beach or making enough money, then it's probably not that you're following God's plan. You're sort of just wanting to sort of serve God, right? But at the same time, it would be like, I want to hold this part back for me. At least that's how I would, as I feel like, because I feel like, I am in a still spot where there are more choices open. I haven't climbed nearly as high as you have, in leadership. I feel like you've been doing what you've been doing for 33 years now, right? So for me, I think maybe I can even just say this is my opinion and perspective, but I feel like if I were to do something that I don't feel is cleared by God, and I was like, God, you can bless this, that would almost be like choosing to put myself center stage.
Yeah, we all go in and out of that. I don't want to present that I'm somehow perfect in that. We all present plans that we think are the right thing, and we ask God to bless them, and they're not really from a discernment point of view. And I do realize I probably should walk this back for a minute. I'm talking extremely boldly out of some deeply held convictions. And if I have upset your apple cart, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'm just telling you my point of view on it. But yeah, I do think, like you said, okay, if it's rare, if it's 10% or less, like you said, that people find their power spot, could it be that the reason why 90% have never found it is because they're thinking wrong?
Yeah, maybe.
Is it really that just only 10% find it? Or is it that only 10% are willing to say, I will follow your precise plan, live for your cause, die to myself, and then later I'll evaluate whether or not it was fulfilling to me. And maybe those people find it. And the people that are saying, I want to find fulfillment first, make sure that it fits Lord, explain it all to me. How are my gifts going to be used here? How my creative juices going to flow? Are they going to pay me properly? Am I going to be treated right? If you have to have all of that answered first, and then you're going to say, okay, now that I'm here and I know this is right, I'm going to die to myself. Let's just arrange that, Lord, here we are. No, it doesn't work like that. I think you got to die first, and then you live. And you got to say, I'll go where you want me to go. And then you say, oh, this is amazing. But it doesn't always feel that way at the beginning. And so maybe we got the order flipped around. Yeah. We want fulfillment on the front end to confirm that we should make this decision. And what God is saying,
or that we should stay with the decision we already made.
Right. Yeah. God's saying, did you hear from me? Trust me. Stay faithful. Be obedient. Take on responsibility. Prove yourself. Persevere. And then after a time, you say, this is life. I'm living the life now. I think maybe we got it upside down and backwards, and that's why very few people ever find this.
Yeah, I think one of my big takeaways from this conversation is that difficult seasons that feel so terrible, whether it's at church or it's because of whatever might be happening, in your situation, just because it's a terrible situation, I think we talk a lot about deliverance and breakthrough, and it's on the other side, and we're pushing through and praying through. But maybe sometimes that's where we're supposed to be, in the jail cell, or like just busy writing letters, not feeling great, cold and damp, and it's like, man, God, when are you? I'm stuck here. But sometimes that's where we are called to be for seasons. You
just described Paul's life, right?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, he's in prison writing letters. I can't get out and preach. I can't do the things I'm called to do. And yet we still read those letters today.
Yeah.
Right? It's so you never know what part of your life is going to make the greatest impact. You just have to be faithful to what God's put in front of you to do. And that is kind of giving up control in some ways.
I wonder what Paul would have been thinking. Like, I guess, I mean, his mindset's so different than mine or that my generation. But 'cause part of me would almost be like, man, did I miss it somewhere?
Sure.
You know, when you're in a jail cell. Like,
These are the wasted years.
yeah,
that I
yeah.
languished in
My
prison.
prime's behind me.
Yeah,
you
when
know?
I wrote the book of Philippians, I wasted that time that still is speaking today across the world. So I mean, yeah, you just don't know what part of your life, the small seasons, the small moments of obedience that are going to cause the greatest impact. And we judge from a human perspective rather than from God's perspective.
This might be too big of a question for the end of this podcast, but I do want to ask this. Looking back now at your time, do you have any regrets or things that you would have done differently now that you've seen what
No,
God has done?
I actually can say, okay, there's some situations I wish I'd handled differently. There's some people I probably could have treated better, right? So, but no, I wouldn't change a thing about my life. I would not change a thing. I would do everything exactly the same. I can say I was faithful to discern the precise plan God had for my life, and I am dead center where I'm supposed to be.
Okay, and for someone who now sees you and they're like, I want to be like Jeff Leake. I know I'm asking in some ways to condense almost an hour-long podcast into a few sentences, but you know, to kind of put a cap on this, how does someone follow the trail that you've blazed in terms of being faithful and being in the will of God and doing things according to your purpose or calling? Like what are just the real short steps that you would encourage?
You won't be me and I won't be you. And I realize that you can't compare my journey with yours. And I can't compare mine with, so it's not going to look the same.
Yeah.
But what is a common concept is discern before you do. Okay, discern. What is God saying to me? Get coaching, get mentoring, have people speak into your life. Be certain that you're hearing from God. Now, certain is 70% certain before I take this step. It's not 100%. And then take that step of faith and stick with it until you've discerned you're supposed to do something else. Most of life is built on simple obedience every day, one day at a time. We just talked in our campus pastor meeting about John Maxwell's principle of 5. And he has this rule that if you know what your 5 main things are in life and you do a little bit of that every day, over time you have compounded interest and you end up accomplish great things. Most of what has got me here isn't big leaps. It's small steps taken every day consistently over a period of time that is compounded to a life of obedience, which has been fruitful. So what's in front of you to do is not some big discernment. It's the small little steps that are next in your life that will help you get there. It's Eugene Peterson, who authored the Message paraphrase, wrote a book called Long Obedience in the Same Direction. That is what we are called to. Little steps of obedience in the direction God has called you to take without veering away because it gets frustrating or painful. Over a long period of time, will produce a lifestyle of dying to self and living in fruitfulness that after decades, you'll look back and say, this was perfect. But it doesn't come in big leaps. It comes in small steps. And that's another one of the things. We want it to feel right, and we want it to be a giant leap or a huge revelation. Most things that God leads us with are tiny little easy things to do that we just have to be faithful with in the moment. So small steps of obedience over a long period of time achieves a life of great fruitfulness.
That's good. Wow.
In whatever direction God's called you to go in.
Yeah. Well, that was awesome. I think I definitely got some things, and hopefully, our listeners did as well. So again, we just want to thank you for joining us for this episode of the Awesome Park Leadership Podcast. As always, we would love it if you would subscribe and share. You can do that on YouTube. You can do that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or share it on social media. We would love that. So hey, thanks for joining us. Have an amazing rest of your day. We'll see you next time.